be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You've got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pigs. The people are going to have to stand up against the pigs. That's what the pastors are doing. That's what the pastors are doing all over the world.
You can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail the revolution. You might run a liberator like Eldridge Cleaver out of the country, but you can't run liberation out of the country. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you'll come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You'll come up with conclusions that don't conclude. And you'd come up with people that you thought should be acting like pigs. That's acting like people, but moving on pigs. Damn it. There are not so many quotes in the world that could get any thinking mind thinking really helplessly deep, like the one you just heard. Those were the words from a great young man who, at the early age of 21, was hunted down and killed by the U.S. government in his bedroom.
You are the ones who are going to decide for yourselves what happened in that apartment on the morning of December 4th. You're going to decide whether or not Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were the victims of premeditated murder.
Now, as you open this, there's also, of course, a knob door in this one. As you open this door, there's blood behind the door. The top hole shows that the bullet was incoming.
They fired through the door and hit the brother through the door. The brother fell here. Most of the blood is dried up, but you can see a little bit of it there and a little bit of it on the floor. The brother was shot 4 or 5 times, so after they came through the door, they shot him again to make sure he was dead.
Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Constantino testified today that Mark Clark could not have struggled after receiving that shot through the heart. Now, in your mind, does this contradict the testimony of Officer Davis, who described a struggle?
Yes, it seems to me that that was a very startling thing. We also learned that the bullet, which was in fact recovered from Mr. Hampton's body, was a bullet fired out of a carbine by Officer Davis. So that indicates also that Officer Davis may well have walked into that back bedroom, contrary to his testimony, and fired a shot into the body of Fred Hampton at one point in time or other,
while he was sound asleep with his 19-year-old fiancée.
This is where our chairman had his brains blown out, and he lay in his bed, sleeping at 4:30 in the morning.
The great variance between the physical evidence and the testimony of the officers raises the question as to whether the officers are falsifying their accounts. Those officers fired 99 shots through the walls of an apartment where they knew people were sleeping. Murder is defined in Illinois as follows: a person who kills an individual without lawful justification commits murder.
He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running from anyone. He did absolutely nothing wrong.
Someone came into the room, started shaking the chairman. Said, Chairman, wake up. The pigs was laughing. Still half asleep, I looked up and I saw bullets coming from, it looked like the front of the apartment, from the kitchen area. When he looked up, he didn't say a word, and he didn't move, except for moving his head up. He laid his head back down to the side like that. He never said a word, and he never got up out the bed.
His only offense was speaking up for himself and his people. That is all.
The person who was in the room, they kept hollering out, stop shooting, stop shooting. We have a pregnant woman, a pregnant sister in here. At that time, I was 8.5 to 9 months pregnant. My baby was to be delivered in 2 weeks. Pigs kept on shooting.
First thing I remember when I woke up was a knock on the door, and it was only a matter of seconds. In fact, I'd say it was less than 5 seconds that I heard, shots. Now, the thing that struck me was that I not only heard shots, but I can see plaster coming out of the walls in my room. So I knew the bullets were coming through the room that I was in.
Federal grand jury comes to its conclusions. Unquestionably, the raid was not professionally planned or properly executed, and the result of the raid was 2 deaths, 4 injuries, and 7 improper criminal charges. In spite of those conclusions, the report then goes on to say, the physical evidence and the discrepancies in the officers' accounts are insufficient to establish probable cause to charge the officers with a willful violation of the occupants' civil rights.
This is the sad, suppressed story of Frederick Allen Hampton.
When they got together, you knew in Bobby Seale, yes, they got together with guns, and there's nothing wrong with that, because we need some guns. Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we are going to have to fight. We're going to have to struggle. We're going to have to struggle relentlessly to bring about some peace, because the people that we're asking for peace, they're a bunch of megalomaniac warmongers, and they don't even understand what peace means. And we've got to fight them. We've got to struggle with them to make them understand what peace means.
Only just 3 years ago, the month of January 2021, being more than 50 years after the brutal police killing of Hampton, hundreds of suppressed FBI documents related to the COINTELPRO program were released through a Freedom of Information Act request. Among those documents was yet another bonus letter, this one from the desk of J. Edgar Hoover himself. In the letter, dated 6 days after Hampton's murder, the FBI director thanked Roy Martin Mitchell, the Chicago FBI agent who orchestrated the raid, for his exemplary efforts.
I am certainly pleased to commend you and to advise you that I have approved an incentive award in the amount of $200 for your outstanding services in a matter of considerable interest to the FBI in the racial field.
Did you hear that? The racial field, he says. This was what J. Edgar Hoover had written to one of the chief organizers of the raid, implying that there was not an iota of remorse in the extermination of such a vibrant young life. Because he was black. The cold murder was something of joy, of fulfillment, of pride for the FBI, the police, and the U.S. government. This was pure evil assassination. Now let us start from the start.
Bobby Seale is going through all types of physical and mental torture. But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution. Right. You might run a liberator like Harris Cleave out the country, but you can't run liberation out the country. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting, and if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You come up with conclusions that don't conclude. And you come up with people that you thought should be acting like pigs, that's acting like people and moving on pigs. And that's what we've got to do. So we're going to see about Bobby, regardless of what these people think we should do. Because school is not important and work is not important. Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all.
The racial progress in the U.S. was at its turning point. Activists won major civil rights battles, and the era of Jim Crow laws had come to an end. But at the end of the decade, there were some deep social and economic gaps for black people across the country. Black Americans continued to face high poverty rates, poor housing, poor education, and unemployment, and they had little to no political representation. These disparities and an increase in police brutality had led inevitably to uprisings across the country. Many young black activists were frustrated that the changes they'd been expecting weren't forthcoming, so they decided to stand up and fight for their rights. This is how the young man, Fred Hampton, emerged in the crazy picture of the black struggle for equality. Frederick Allen Hampton, from the 30th of August 1948 to the 4th day of December 1969, became an activist early in his life in response to the climbing pressure and crying state of the collective black communities at the time. The youngest child of Francis and Iberia Hampton, Fred, was raised in the Chicago suburbs with his brother and sister. Among his family's acquaintances was Emmett Till, a black child whom Iberia had babysat. In 1955, when Till was a teenager visiting relatives in Mississippi, He was linked by local white men. The Hampton family's connection with Till, along with their experience of racial inequity in their suburban community, made Fred keenly aware of racial injustice. This had left a great impression on him as a boy growing up, and had played a great role to the man he gradually became in a troubled community whose plights needed urgent answers.
Why do I have a lot of arrests? Because of harassment. Why is that harassment? Because the people that harass me have set up a problem that made me disagree with them violently, and they set up this problem in order to exploit me and other people like me. And why they want to get rid of me? Because I'm saying something that might wake up some other exploited people and some other oppressed people, and if all these people ever get together, then these pigs that are exploiting us, we'll be able to run them into the lake. That's why they want to get rid of us.
As a high school student, Fred Hampton was really concerned about the absolute freedom of the blacks. In a quest to fulfill this dream, he made so many sacrifices for Black American community even though he was young. He organized student campaigns for more black teachers and administrators, pressed the school to select its first black homecoming queen, and had even led protests at the Maywood police station. In addition to his portfolio, Hampton had organized trips for local black children to the nearest racially mixed public pool, but it was about 5 miles, that is 8 kilometers away. At one particular rally, when store windows were broken and a shed set ablaze, protesters clashed with the local police. Who was responsible for the damage remains unclear, but Hampton and 17 others were at this point charged with disorderly conduct and mob action. That notwithstanding, the rallies eventually accomplished their goal. A goal for an integrated pool for Maywood, which was later approved, and the village board named the site the Fred Hampton Family Aquatic Center. This is to say, in the least, how passionately devoted Hampton was in the struggle for the betterment of the black communities in the United States. In 1966, Hampton, by then a junior college student, was recruited to join the West Suburban National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP chapter, and eventually led the branch's youth council. After experiencing a series of negative, occasionally violent interactions with the police at rallies and demonstrations, he was frustrated with both the NAACP and the civil rights movement at large. So he parted ways with the by-the-book NAACP and before long joined the Black Panther Party as one of the Illinois chapter's original members. The Black Panther Party, founded 2 years earlier in Oakland, California by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, had originally been intended to organize patrols of black neighborhoods and protect residents from police brutality. Shortly, it evolved into a Marxist revolutionary group whose main aim was to pay reparations to African Americans for the centuries of exploitation they had endured, for exempting African Americans from the military draft, and for harming African American communities. Hampton had attained prominence in his late teens and very early 20s in Chicago as deputy chairman of the National Black Panther Party and chair of the Illinois chapter. His charisma and distinct quality as a promising leader was undeniable. On joining the Black Panther Party in 1967, Hampton had worked wholeheartedly for the group, devoting his time, resources, and energy to it. The group, seeing his zealousness, would not hesitate in making him the prominent leader and deputy chairman of the Chicago, Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. His enthusiastic sacrifices paved the way for the group's development. There had been so many known instances where Hampton portrayed his undying love for his fellow black Americans. Some good examples include when he organized food pantries, educational programs, and recreational outlets for impoverished children, and how he also helped in bringing about a peaceful coexistence among the city's rival street gangs. Hampton considered fascism the greatest threat, saying that nothing is more important than stopping fascism because fascism will stop us all. As time went on, the Black Panther Party had begun gaining some reputation down to the very grassroots of American society due to its active and welcome social endeavors. As a reason, the group had begun posing some serious concerns to the U.S. government. According to J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI then,
the Black Panthers were the greatest threat to the internal security of the country.
And how so? Just nothing but that undying rabid hate in a white man's soul to see the black man rise above slavery and oppression. No sooner had the Chicago Black Panthers begun than the FBI took to monitoring their activity. Hampton was a possible suspect for what Hoover considered the threat of an emerging messiah, a leader who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X, prior to his assassination, Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad had also been among those targeted as possible agitators. The FBI had been present at the scene of the Chicago Black Panthers Foundation too, in the person of informant William O'Neill, an African-American teenager who a few months earlier had stolen a car, driven it under the influence of alcohol, and crashed it. In exchange for dropping the resulting charges against him, O'Neill, who had been appointed as the Illinois chapter security director, provided the FBI with reports on Panther meetings, members' access to weapons, and the floor plans of their homes, with a special focus on Fred Hampton. In other words, they had compromised one of his own, a fellow black man, to snitch on him, and the Judas had fallen for it to save his own head. With Hampton as deputy chairman, the Illinois chapter launched community service projects in Chicago like those the Panthers had initiated in Oakland, including a free medical clinic and a free breakfast program for children. Although the latter served as the inspiration for the USDA's expansion of its own free breakfast program and the creation of the National School Breakfast Program that was later authorized in 1975, Hoover had maliciously said that the inspiration came from the wrong source and would try all means mischievous to make it look so. They began to make life miserable for Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers.
And we got around 9 people still locked up in jail. We have 2 people still locked up in jail from a July 30th shootout we had with the pigs. And we have around 4 or 5 more still locked up from the last ambush at the office on a week ago Saturday, I think. And these people are people that work hard for the party here in Chicago. And the main thing that we believe caused the vamp on the office leads right back to what you were talking about, the chairman being in Chicago. You know, people came into the office and piled up the supplies for the health clinic and burned it in the middle of the floor. This showed some type of megalomaniac tendencies that these people have because they're obsessed and they're crazy with power. They came into there and they ripped the brothers out of the office and then beat them brutally when they got them outside the office. The brothers did not shoot at them like they claimed they did. They said that somebody in the block was sniping and these drunkard bastards went up in the office and burned the whole office down because some people were shooting at them. The main issue is that the chairman's down there at the federal building and the chairman's being tried illegally because the chairman is not a criminal. As a matter of fact, he's just the opposite of a criminal. He's just as far from being a criminal as that judge is from being a teenager because he's the father of our Breakfast with Children program. He's the father of our free health clinic. And this is not, if this is criminal, then we all want to be criminal. If it's criminal to feed children that are hungry, if it's criminal to start a program that says that the only prerequisite that people have to involve themselves in this program is to be hungry, then we're going to continue to be criminal. If it's criminal to say that the only prerequisite that people have to have when they want free medical aid is that they be sick, then we intend to continue to be criminal.
In Richmond, Virginia, FBI agents had begun visiting houses, warning parents that the Panthers were using the breakfast to teach racial divisiveness. In San Francisco, California, a rumor had spread that the food was contaminated by venereal disease. A former Panther claimed that the night before the Chicago free breakfast program was supposed to begin, the Chicago police had broken into the church where the Panthers stored the food and they'd mashed up all the food and urinated on them. The program's opening was delayed, but the vandalism inspired support from the community. Hampton had used his talent as a communicator to create what he termed a rainbow coalition, an alliance of the Panthers with other groups organized around racial, ethnic, or ideological affiliation, bringing together groups that otherwise would have had almost no positive contact, including the Puerto Rican Young Lords Association, the Poor White Young Patriots Organization, and the Blackstone Ranger Street Gang. The Rainbow Coalition provided aid to low-income citizens by combining the member groups' varied resources.
We got to face some facts. That the masses are poor, that the masses belong to what you call the lower class, and when I talk about the masses, I'm talking about the white masses, I'm talking about the black masses, and the brown masses, and the yellow masses too. We've got to face the fact that some people say you fight fire best with fire, but we say you put fire out best with water. We say you don't fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. We say you don't fight capitalism with no black capitalism. You fight capitalism with socialism.
These were Fred Hampton's words of solidarity, the philosophy behind his wit which had turned him into a unifier of diverse skin colors, cultures, and peoples at that time. Fred had people doing push-ups in the morning, prepping food for the community, and giving people a purpose who never had one at 21 years old. As Fred's influence began to grow, so did the desperate desire of the U.S. government to destroy him and the Black Panthers even quicker. Hampton, along with other Panthers, had become identified as a radical threat by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI had begun disseminating false information about the groups Fred belonged to and placed a counterintelligence operative, also called COINTELPRO, on the local Panthers. A hearing on FBI misconduct uncovered documents containing directives to destroy the Panthers' Breakfast for Children program and to disrupt the distribution of the Black Panthers newspaper. In an attempt to bring down Hampton and the Black Panther Party, so many accusations were being leveled against him and the party. The U.S. government had begun using the media, which obviously was at their beck and call, as a weapon against them. They had begun spreading so much news through every available news vendors with all kinds of mind-troubling headlines like Oakland policemen slain in gunfight with Negroes, armed Black Panthers invade state assembly chambers, Black Panther chief on trial for murder, Black Panther fight kills police officer, the gun-wearing Black Panthers, and so on. Fred Hampton was arrested on so many occasions, some of which included his arrest in 1969 with an old traffic warrant, a court order requiring a person's arrest and commanding their appearance before the judge. Later that year, he was also arrested and went on trial for stealing ice cream bars in the Chicago suburb of Maywood in 1968. Hampton and the other members of the Black Panthers Party tried convincing the court that he was innocent of the accusations, that it was all a setup, but after all said and done, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. The tension between the Panthers and police also rose when 2 officers and a Black Panther were killed during a November 1969 shootout. A gun battle in which 18 were injured, 2 police officers and a 19-year-old Black Panther were killed. Authorities felt Hampton's role in the party linked him to the police deaths, though he was out of town when the confrontation took place. However, Fred survived the accusations, harsh treatment, COINTELPRO and governmental smear campaigns, but not the assassin's bullets. Early in the pre-dawn hours of December 4th, 1969, a People's Gas truck had pulled up in front of an apartment building at 2337 West Monroe Street in the west side of Chicago. 14 plainclothes Chicago police officers quietly filed out of the undercover truck, armed with pistols, a shotgun, a machine gun, and a detailed map of their target, an apartment occupied by leaders of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. The map clearly identified the bedroom of Fred Hampton, the 21-year-old chairman of the Chicago Black Panthers, who was asleep beside his 8-month pregnant fiancée, who was only 19. It was 4:30 a.m., and at such an hour of the day, the police had kicked down the front door and started shooting. Ballistics reports later showed that they fired more than 90 times, including machine gun rounds through exterior walls and windows. When the volley of bullets finally stopped, 4 of the young Black Panthers inside the apartment lay shot and critically wounded, and 2 had been killed. The first was Mark Clark, who reached for his own shotgun before taking a bullet through the heart. The second was Fred Hampton, gunned down in his bed. The police were acting under the orders of Edward Hanrahan, the Cook County State's attorney, who held a press conference claiming that his officers were surprise attacked by the Black Panthers as the police tried to execute a search warrant for illegal weapons in the apartment.
The immediate violent criminal reaction of the occupants in shooting at announced police officers emphasizes the extreme viciousness of the Black Panther Party,
said Hanrahan. But this was all just cold, unfeeling lies of devils in human form. While it didn't take long for Hanrahan's account to fall apart, it took more than a decade for the whole disturbing truth to come to light. Not only was the killing of Hampton and Clark a cold-blooded assassination of two militant black activists, but documents later revealed it was coordinated by the FBI as part of a secret program to neutralize and destroy the Black Panther Party, which FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover privately called the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. And Jerry, Hampton's fiancée, had sadly stated that after the police removed her from the room, they said Hampton was barely alive. She then heard two more shots, followed by the words, "He's good and dead now."
The next thing I remember was someone in our room shaking Chairman Fred. Chairman, wake up, wake up. Plaster was flying off the wall. You could smell the cordite from the gunshot. If you've ever been under gunfire, 5 minutes is 5 hours. To you, it seems like forever. The shooting started back again. Then another voice unfamiliar to me said, "He's good and dead now." I knew they were talking about Chairman Fred.
He's good and dead now.
That statement alone is a confirmation that Fred Hampton was marked for death all along. And that mission, at that moment, was accomplished. It must have been really gruesome, the pain Akua and Jerry, Fred Hampton's fiancée, had to go through. She was only 19, too tender for such a cruel, ungodly experience. In 1 minute, she was lying on the same bed with her fiancé, who was hale and hearty, and in another minute, he was gone to a path of no return, leaving behind their 8 months unborn child, one he may have only imagined but would never get to see his face again. William O'Neill, who at this point was Hampton's trusted friend and bodyguard, and was in charge of security on the night of Hampton's murder, was widely believed to have drugged Fred Hampton so as to ensure that he would not be able to defend himself. He had also provided the floor plan of Hampton's apartment to the FBI, which made it easy for the police to track his position. No illegal weapons were found during the raid, but the 7 Panthers who survived, 4 of whom were injured, were arrested for aggravated assault and attempted murder. What oppression in the world could be worse than that? As the apartment was not sealed off, the Black Panther Party subsequently offered tours of the scene. Though the police account was that they had been responding to gunfire, this story was debunked when what had been described by law enforcement as holes created by Panther bullets were shown to be actually nail heads. Charges against the Panthers who had survived the raid were dismissed in 1970 after a critical investigation on the case. In that same year, a federal grand jury investigation also found that police had fired 82 to 99 times, with only 1 shot coming from those in the apartment, which was in self-defense. Cook County State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan, who had directed the raid, was indicted for obstruction of justice in 1971, along with an assistant and 12 officers from the raid. However, no convictions resulted from any of these charges. By 1972, Hanrahan was voted out of office. This was a harbinger of shifting Chicago politics, leading to the election of the first black mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington, in 1983. That same year, a settlement was reached for the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government to pay $1.85 million to survivors of the raid and to Hampton's and Clark's families, with a ruling that stated the government had conspired against the Black Panther Party and violated the civil rights of the plaintiffs. Really? Would this bring back the lost souls? Would this wipe out the scars that they put on the minds of the young ones? Will this money heal the ailing hearts of those parents whose kids has only been killed for nothing? How about the young women who have been turned into widows from very similar cases at a very young age? However, we are going to close this video with a heart-touching statement by Olga. Every time the economic system is challenged by poor people reclaiming what was stolen from them, it's met with brutal violence. From the diggers in England who had their life based on common land stolen from them, to striking miners, to striking workers in Detroit and Michigan, to poor blacks in the South, from Fred Hampton, who was uniting across racial lines in Chicago, to MLK, who was creating a poor people's movement across racial lines, from indigenous people to Oka in Chiapas, Mexico, overseas like Cuba, which was the greatest victim of terrorist attack in history, to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The list goes on and on. The only way to stop this is solidarity and mobilization, and keep on fighting. Someday we will build a giant monument to Fred Hampton in Chicago, because eventually justice and humanity will win. 50 years after Hampton's tragic death, his words continue to speak to the lives of marginalized classes, races, and castes across countries who continue to be persecuted by the same institutionalized foot soldiers of racialized capitalism. That brings us to the end of yet another very touching video segment. Support our work by kindly hitting the thumb button, share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and subscribe to stay with us if you are yet to. We've got more eye-opening stories ahead, and we are delighted to have you. Thank you for watching.